On this episode of Charged and Disbarred.
He was a senior partner at Huggin Lovells. He found himself trying to maintain his facade of his lifestyle and his life in London, while at the same time maintaining a mistress in New York.
John Avery was credited for representing Martin Bryant. Over a 6-year period, he'd been taking funds from his clients. They needed those funds. He didn't. He stole them.
Judges and attorneys are like kings and knights in their own realm. It is unthinkable that in a moment of madness it can all be thrown away. Charged and Disbarred explores the true life stories of attorneys who have fallen from grace. Hear firsthand accounts from the victims, detectives, and prosecutors who brought these disgraced attorneys to justice. This is Charged and Disbarred. At some point in every person's life, they'll be faced with matters of the heart. Matters that compel them to make tough choices. Choices that often lead to terrible consequences. History is littered with ambitious people who thought they could achieve all their heart's desire by simply giving more and thinking very little of the input that was needed to continue. Sometimes, the very thing someone turns to is the very thing that destroys them. Such was the tale of Christopher Grierson. Upon earning a law degree in 1973 from the prestigious University of Durham in northeast England, Christopher Grierson readied himself for a quiet life and a low-profile career as a country lawyer. However, he soon realized that the quiet country life was not for him. He was attracted to the hustle and bustle of the city and decided to move to London in 1976 and immediately got involved in litigation work. By his own admission, he enjoyed the adversarial nature of litigation and the stagecraft required of trial work, the game of setting up your opponent for that fatal blow. Friends and colleagues described Grierson as likable, restrained, and a soft-spoken man. By all accounts, a gentleman, but make no mistake, he played to win. It was this formidable combination of agreeability and aggression that established him as one of the most highly regarded lawyers in London.
My name is Michael McCabe. I'm an attorney in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been practicing law since 1992. I represent attorneys who were involved in lawyer disciplinary and disbarment proceedings. Christopher Grierson is a very well-known London-based attorney, one of the finest attorneys in the city. Christopher, by all measures of success, had it all. He was a senior partner at Huggin Lovells, which is one of the premier law firms in the world. He was a very well-respected partner at the firm, and he had a fantastic law practice. He was making a lot of money over the years and was extremely successful.
It was no surprise to anyone when it was announced that he was runner-up in the 2010 Lawyer of the Year Awards. But what made him so successful?
Mr. Grierson did a lot of corporate advice for businesses. Some of the more famous things he was noted for was being involved in advising people with regard to the Bernie Madoff scandal. He had a number of other high-profile matters that he was consulting in.
Most lawyers only dream of the kind of success and prestige Christopher Grierson was enjoying. He had it all: a thriving career, a sterling reputation, and a Brazilian beauty as a wife. What else could a man desire? All of this success did not simply land on his doorstep. As any high-profile achiever, he worked hard for it. But such great success often comes with a price. For Christopher Grierson, that price was his health. In 2007, Grierson suffered from depression after having already been diagnosed in 2005 with bipolar disorder. Then, in October 2010, he suffered heart problems and underwent a triple bypass operation in January 2011. Grierson was forced to take time away from work to focus on his health. A hard blow for a man as driven for success as Grierson. Yet somehow, between May 2009 and May 2010, he billed over 3,500 hours. That is the equivalent of nearly 75 hours per week. How could so many hours have been billed during a time when Christopher Grierson was the most ill? Mr. Grierson was unwittingly falling into the trap, as many high-powered and high-achieving individuals do. It is common for such people to be extremely driven, but even they have to admit that there is the need to be relieved from the constant stress. For Mr. Grierson, this relief came in the form of high-class call girls. So attracted was he to the seductive lifestyle, he soon gained a reputation amongst his friends and colleagues. His barrister, Mark Ellison, remarked that it was as a means of escape and a source of some sort of affection. Grierson thought these paid women possessed the level of sensuality and sophistication he desired without any strings attached. But things soon took a turn when Grierson was introduced to someone new.
Mr. Grierson became infatuated with a Lebanese woman who was living in the United States in New York. Starting around 2006, Mr. Grierson became romantically involved with this woman. Mr. Grierson was married at the time and the father of 4 children, and so he found himself constantly flying back and forth between London and New York for business purposes, trying to maintain his facade of his lifestyle and his life in London, while at the same time maintaining a mistress in New York.
Even though this was a moral failure on the part of Mr. Grierson, he was still able to maintain a sense of control at his profession. At least that's what it seemed.
It's very expensive to maintain 2 sets of women, one in London and another one in New York City, and trying to manage that caused him to have to dip into the corporate kitty. And he did this by having to commit fraud on his law firm.
Up to this point, the only crimes Christopher Grierson had committed were crimes of the heart. His prior indiscretions were physical in nature and never emotional. But now he found himself in uncharted territory. He had taken on a mistress and become romantically involved. This act alone would force Grierson into even deeper secrets. Secrets that came at a high cost. A cost Grierson was compelled to pay.
How Mr. Grierson was able to pull this scam off was actually quite simple. He would buy airline tickets, charge them on his personal charge card. He would then submit his credit card bill to the firm and seek reimbursement for the airline tickets, which he would cancel. And so that his credit card would get credited for the charges, but the firm wasn't advised about the cancellation, so the firm would pay him the dollars for the airline tickets that he had canceled.
Grierson had found a way to maintain his lifestyle, but for how long? The real question is, how expensive was it to maintain this affair?
Mr. Grierson needed a lot of money to keep his lifestyle going in this time period where he was with this Lebanese woman. He was spending it mostly on her, to the tune of over 600,000 pounds over an 18-month period between 2006 and 2007. So he spent over 600,000 pounds just on her apartment expenses in New York, and another 220,000 pounds or so for cash and gifts.
Living in New York City, his mistress was far away from Grierson's wife, who lived in London. But this besotted lawyer's spending increasingly got out of control. 630,000 pounds went to the rent on her apartment, while he also paid her over 280,000 pounds in cash. Grierson soon found himself unable to keep up with the financial demands of the relationship. He borrowed 650,000 pounds in a series of bank loans, largely to fund the affair. But Christopher Grierson's outrageous behavior finally got exposed in August 2007 when his wife learned of his infidelity. The marriage was over, but Christopher Grierson's problems had just begun. Grierson's attempt to keep his adulterous behavior concealed while also maintaining his mistress had created a mountain of debt. He doubled his £900,000 mortgage to £1.8 million and maxed out his credit cards. Money was disappearing fast, and Grierson began to panic. Grierson apparently decided that two wrongs would make things right, and he began to fleece his law firm to cover these debts.
Mr. Grierson had to maintain not only the lifestyle for his mistress in New York, but he also had a family of 4 children and a wife that he was trying to maintain in London, which is not the cheapest place in the world to live.
When all was said and done, Grierson had made 57 false claims between January 2008 and May 2011 while working for his firm, Hogan Lovells.
Mr. Grierson defrauded Hogan Lovells of over £1.2 million. All of this occurred over roughly an 18-month period of time. At that point in time, it was roughly $2 million.
One wonders how Christopher Grierson could get away with his fraudulent practice for so long without being caught. However, this tower of fraud had been built too high and for too long. It all came crashing down when a fellow partner at Hogan Lovells questioned a travel expense Grierson had submitted for £60,000.
Mr. Grierson's criminal conduct came to light at the Huggins Lovell firm because a partner in the firm had noticed an extraordinarily large charge for a trip that was supposedly taken by Mr. Grierson between London and Los Angeles, where Mr. Grierson was claiming expenses of $60,000. The problem was that the client that Mr. Grierson allegedly went to visit in LA was no longer a client of Hogan Lovells and had not been so for some time. So this raised some red flags at the firm, which caused them to go and look back at his earlier expense reports, and that's when everything unraveled.
More red flags were raised when the partners realized the small amount of billable hours this LA client had with the firm.
This was a client that Mr. Grierson's firm had only performed a small number of hours of work for, like on the order of 10 hours of work. That also raised flags of why this extraordinary expense was being laid out for a client that was so relatively small to the firm.
What they found astonished everyone. As his partners started to investigate further, the extent of Grierson's fraud became clear. Abuse of trust, years of deception and fraud came out into the open. His name, reputation, and life's work was shrouded in shame and disgrace. As pressure mounted, Grierson realized that the game was up.
Once Mr. Grierson's partners learned of the conduct, he immediately retired from the firm. He left the employ of Hogan Lovells, and within a very short period of time, he reimbursed the firm for all of the funds that he had stolen.
The truth was revealed and the money was gone. But his problems were only just beginning. Christopher Grierson was charged with several counts of criminal misconduct and awaited trial. The partners at Hogan Lovells, who had been sympathetic to Grierson's adultery, now found themselves similarly betrayed. In court papers, it was revealed that his partners felt that, for a very long time, Christopher Grierson abused his trust in a very, very cynical way.
Well, that wasn't the end of it for Mr. Grierson. He still needed to face criminal prosecutors, and he was charged with multiple counts of fraud. His defense in his fraud case was that he was suffering from severe depression and bipolar disorder. At the end result was that he was found guilty of multiple counts of defrauding his law firm.
Upon his conviction, Mr. Grierson faced the potential of a long prison sentence for his crimes.
So in 2012, the court imposed a sentence of 3 years of imprisonment for Mr. Grierson.
As with any great betrayal, the cost in the end far outweighed the pleasures that tempted the poor soul who partook in its deception. Grierson lost his freedom, his career, and his marriage. As part of the divorce settlement, he was forced to give his ex-wife the home in Roehampton valued at £3.8 million and to sell off other assets to pay back his debts. Grierson served 2 years in prison before being released for health-related reasons. However, he will forever be a convicted felon, and he will never practice law again. Christopher Grierson chased his heart's desire to the big city in lieu of a quiet country life. But over time, as the high pressure of his job took its toll, his vices took control of him, and he ended up destroying all he had dreamed of and much more.
It sounds to me like it could be maybe not so aberrational because of the length of time the affair lasted.
What the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies. Next on Charged and Disbarred.
John Avery was credited for representing Martin Bryant. Over a 6-year period, he'd been taking funds from his clients. They needed those funds. He didn't. He stole it.
This is Charged and Disbarred.
John D. Rockefeller was America's first billionaire. He was so successful that in the early 1900s, he was known as the world's richest man. When a reporter asked him how much money is enough, he responded, just a little bit more. Greed. The dictionary defines greed as an intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth or power. Greed is a potentially destructive character trait, yet one of the most powerful motivators of the human heart. The wise and the foolish have fallen prey to its allure throughout the ages. It has caused wars to be waged and laws to be set in place to guard against it. Despite the often destructive power of greed, the seduction and promise of more is simply too great for some to resist. Take, for instance, the case of John Avery.
I'm Marlene Ebinger. I'm a lawyer from Werribee, Melbourne, Australia. I'm an accredited family law specialist and have a keen interest in legal practice and ethics. I give presentations on updated cases where lawyers have acted unethically, inappropriate. Sometimes their practicing certificates are suspended, sometimes they're cancelled, and sometimes the lawyers are actually struck off the roll. Being struck off is like being disbarred in America.
Hobart, the capital city of the Australian island state of Tasmania, was founded in 1803. It claims a long and vast history of its people working together to create something beautiful. Today, Hobart is a proud, modern city with a prosperous economy built around its seaport and the influx of almost 2 million tourists a year. After more than 150 years of prosperity and growth, one would think that Tasmania is only a place of virtue. But one man was hell-bent on attempting to destroy that peace that so many held dear. On April 28, 1996, the worst mass murder in Australia's history occurred. Martin Bryant opened fire with various automatic assault rifles in the tourist town of Port Arthur, killing 35 people and seriously injuring 23 more. As the nation of Australia coped with the shock and sorrow of this unspeakable tragedy, the man who committed this heinous crime still had to be brought to justice. It was important to the national well-being that the proceedings be expedited. It would take a brave and experienced lawyer willing to defend the man many considered a monster. John Avery was that lawyer.
John Avery was a lawyer who practiced for 30 years in the state of Tasmania. He was a fairly high-profile lawyer because he represented basically a mass murderer by the name of Martin Bryant. He'd massacred 35 people and injured about 23 people at a place called Port Arthur.
John Avery had been practicing law for many years and instinctively knew that if this case went to trial, it would only add more pain and suffering to this already grieving community. Therefore, his main objective was to avoid trial at all costs. His plan was simple: get Martin Bryant to plead guilty on all 72 counts. But that was easier said than done. Bryant, in spite of the many witnesses and camera footage that placed him at the scene of the crime, pleaded not guilty.
John Avery hatched a clever plan, convinced Martin Bryant that if he refused to plead guilty, the public would think he was stupid. The plan worked, and Bryant pled guilty to all charges.
John Avery was credited for representing Martin Bryant and getting a guilty plea out of him, which obviously saved a lot of heartache for the victims, of the families and survivors of that terrible day in Port Arthur.
Avery was instrumental in getting Bryant to plead guilty, saving the families of his victims from having to give testimony in court, and thus reliving the tragic events of April 28, 1996. On November 22, 1996, Martin Bryant pled guilty to all 72 counts and was sentenced to serve 35 life sentences plus 1,035 years without parole in Risdon Prison. With this monster behind bars, the Australian nation and the Tasmanian community was able to begin the long process of healing from this senseless tragedy. There was a general sense of deep gratitude to John Avery for sparing them all from reliving the horror of that day. Avery, now with newfound fame as a high-profile lawyer and a six-figure salary, started to develop a taste for the good life.
He seemed to have a fairly lavish lifestyle. He was a partner in a firm. He was earning about $150,000 a year.
Few people would begrudge him for such indulgences. After all, he was a hard-working man enjoying the fruits of his success. As a prolific attorney, success and money came easy to Mr. Avery and his law firm. He was regarded with such high esteem and trust that his partners appointed him to oversee the firm's trust account.
Dealing with trust money is a very serious matter. Not all lawyers can deal with trust money. You actually have to be a principal lawyer, which means you're at the top of the firm, and you have to obtain a certificate that allows you to deal with trust money.
However, unbeknownst to his colleagues and clients, Mr. Avery's lavish tastes were more expensive than his finances were able to support.
Over a 6-year period, he'd been taking funds from his clients, so money that was being held in the firm's trust account. He would take maybe $100 here, a couple of thousand there. The most they said that he took at any one time was about $14,000. Over the 6-year period, he'd stolen about $512,000 from his clients.
Stealing from your clients, regardless of who they are, is disgraceful and a crime. However, to steal from clients, such as those represented by Mr. Avery, was downright despicable.
He represented clients who were facing real difficulties in their life. They were personal injury clients and workers' compensation clients. So really, they were making claims for injuries that probably prevented them from working and obtaining income. So they really needed to win their cases, and they really needed the funds that they were going to be awarded. But instead, Mr. Avery decided that he could use their money to assist in his purchasing of artwork and expensive watches.
But as always, the wheels of justice turned, and eventually Mr. Avery was caught when the firm's financial manager and Avery's partners discovered his treachery in March of 2006.
He was found out, as I said, by people that worked within his firm, his partner, his financial manager, and they reported it, which was the right thing to do. So obviously the firm had many good people working in that firm.
Why would someone in Mr. Avery's privileged position still feel the need to steal from his clients? It seemed absurd that he would risk a 30-year career for only $500,000 that was spent on art, travel, and furniture.
During Mr. Avery's criminal proceedings, there were damning comments made about him, that he stole for greed and not need. Whereas his clients, who were personal injury clients and workers' compensation clients, they needed it. They needed those funds. He didn't. He stole it to meet his obsession of artwork and watches. Perhaps being a high-profile lawyer, receiving media attention, I'm sure not just in Australia, but perhaps internationally, because it was such a high-profile case, that he decided that he needed to live a much wealthier lifestyle than the one perhaps he was getting on his $150,000 salary per year in Tasmania. When I read the judgment in the Supreme Court of Tasmania, it was implied there that the only reason Mr Avery stopped his conduct is because he got caught. If he hadn't been caught, he could have still continued on to steal money from the trust account and from his clients.
John Avery pled guilty to 130 counts of stealing and dishonesty that occurred between December 2001 and March 2006. He was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison.
So Mr Avery was given parole when he advised the parole board that he was getting assistance with his addiction for artwork and expensive watches. Well, we can all tell the parole board what they want to hear. Mr Avery knew exactly what he was doing. As it was implied in the judgment that I read, Mr Avery stopped because he got caught, not because he decided that was the wrong thing to do. He never admitted at that time, when he was taking the money, it was a course of conduct over a 6-year period. It affected around 50 clients of his firm. It was discovered by his financial manager and his partner, so he wasn't being honest with the people that he worked with his colleagues, and he wasn't representing his firm in the correct manner. Again, he was a lawyer that brought our profession to disrepute. But he got caught and he went to prison and he served his time.
Mr. Avery claims that the pressure he experienced in Mr. Bryant's criminal case contributed to his own subsequent criminal behavior. Regardless, Mr. Avery's thievery came at a high price. In addition to 3 years in prison, he was stricken off the roll and was forced to sell his home and auction off his art collection to pay his debts and reimburse his victims. Avery was seduced by his greed for luxury and allowed it to destroy his career and rob him of his freedom, just as he robbed others of desperately needed funds. A high price to pay for artwork and car insurance.